3, 2, 1. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Mobile Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Leppert, and tonight I have a longtime listener, 15th time caller. I think he's been on the podcast how many times?
2.5.
2.5?
2.5.
2.5 times. Tonight, we thought we would bring you kind of something a little different. He still competes. I used to compete in archery, and there's a lot of things that we get to learn and kind of have at the very least, a basic understanding for that a lot of bow hunters don't get. So we're going to talk about the top most overlooked things in bow hunting, and then how you can go about maybe getting better at some of those things. And they're not all archery related, but a good majority of them are. So, Grip, you kind of want to maybe talk about some of the bucks you killed real quick, and maybe some of your accolades within competition and all that,
Sure.
just to kind of give people, a sense for your credentials.
Sure. I started bow hunting as a young man at the age of 22. I believe it was in 1992. And growing up as a kid, the whitetail population was nothing like it is today. And so my dad hunted rabbits. So that's what I kind of cut my teeth on. That's when I started hunting, was with him as a young guy. And then I got into bow hunting as a young man. And after I did that for a few years, then someone approached me and said, "Hey, you want to go to a 3D shoot?" And then it turned into, I want to compete in any archery event that I can find. So over the last 33 years, I've taken about 8 Pope and Young bucks, I think.
Okay.
And then of course, a lot of does and younger bucks and whatnot. And then competitively, I used to shoot a lot of spots. I have a few OAA, Ohio Archers Association, state titles in various spot
This is
shooting.
indoor paper, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Blueface, Vegas.
Okay.
That kind of stuff. And then I got, not long after that, I got pretty serious into the 3D. Started going to the national shoots and the world championships, IBO, in 97.
Okay. Geez, you jumped right in.
Yeah.
Wow.
It didn't take me long.
Wow.
And then during that time, I have, I think 4 national titles.
Wow.
As far as just taking first place at the various national shoots. In 2012, I was fortunate enough to win the IBO World Championships in MBR, Male Bow Hunter Release. And I have a few other podium placements.
Okay.
I think I've got a second, a third. I think maybe either my third was in 2009. My second place at World Championships was 2018. Just this past year, I was second in the Triple Crown overall.
Okay.
Didn't go to the World Championships, but
Now to get back to what you've won 4 legs of the Triple Crown, or you've won 4 national titles?
4 national shoots.
Okay. Have you ever won the Triple Crown?
Have not.
Never won the Triple Crown. Man,
No.
I'm surprised.
It is.
That's tough.
It is. It's hard enough to string together 40 good targets.
Yes.
But to do that 3 times in a row.
Yep.
It is. Hats off to someone who can.
And you can even do that, and somebody can still finish better.
Yeah. I had 3 really good finishes this year. I was this past summer. I was second place in all 3 of the Triple Crowns.
Man.
And ended up second place for the overall title for the Triple Crown. So.
Jeez.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you have it. The dude can shoot a bow. I've shot with him, against him, you name it. We've shared some pretty fun times on the archery course. I don't think we've hunted together yet, have we?
I don't think we have.
We
no.
haven't. So I want to get into the first thing that I think is probably one of the most overlooked things with bow hunters, and that's third axis.
Sure.
Your third axis adjustment. We talked earlier. Not every sight has the third axis adjustment, and part of me wants to say, well, ditch that thing and go buy another, or is there a way at all that you can kind of jimmy it to?
If you have a sight that doesn't have a third axis adjustment, man,
Because essentially what that's doing, that's when your sight moves this way and this way,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So essentially the only way to really go about adjusting that would be to shim the sight at the connecting point
where,
of the bow.
where it bolts to the riser.
But that would be hell on earth, because even with our really nice target setups that have beautiful little hash marked
Yeah.
little spots, and you've got your little levels that you put on there, it takes me, I don't know about you, it takes me a hot minute.
It takes us a while to get that figured out.
So
yeah.
if you had to shim, and then if you shim it too much one way, which you adjust it more than enough multiple times.
I mean, and what are you going to shim with? Pieces of
Paper?
index card or yeah.
It would be hell.
You're sitting there. It's craft time at the
Literally.
at the gripper house.
It
we're
would
cutting.
probably be a day that you would
Yeah.
go through that. Now, I have to say, though, I would bet money that somebody like a Tim Gillingham or somebody before all these third axis adjustment sites came along, I mean, somebody had to figure it out some way.
They had a way.
Yeah.
Whatever that system was, I don't know what it was.
I'll bet it was index cards
It might have been.
and a day at the kitchen table.
I didn't even really pay attention to or even think about in all the I don't know how many years that I competed, number one, with a site that didn't have a third axis, and it just wasn't even something that you just knew, oh man, I'm shooting downhill, I have a tendency to go a little left when I shoot downhill.
Yeah.
So you would kind of Kentucky windage that, and you would just know. Or if I'm shooting uphill, I have a tendency to do either one. But yeah, I don't think third axis was something that I even heard of until, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I guess.
I hadn't messed with it at all. I heard about it in 2018 when I got into competing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I shot, for Jeff up there, and nobody worried about it. And so I thought, okay, no big deal. Well, then when I started shooting with Luke and we dove into things, we started messing around in the yards and stuff, and realized real quick, it's the reason we bring this up is when you're in your yard, in your flat yard, you will never see it. Basically, it's when you're introducing those uphill and downhill pretty severe angles, and then as that angle gets severe and then you move further and further away from the target, that's where, when your bubble isn't perfectly centered and it's just off a little bit one way or the other, you'll notice you'll hit inches to the right or to the left. And so,
well, what will happen is as you pivot that bow and you're no longer at this 90-degree level, with your arm straight out away. And if you bend at the waist, either up or down, and that bow starts to go close, if you're bending down and that bow goes down, if your third axis is out, then it will read unlevel on your level,
yeah,
which will cause you to torque and to bring your level back in. And of course, if your sight pins are above your level and you're torquing to get your level back level, now your sight pins are moving right and left, and that's going to throw you off
Yes.
either right or left.
Yep.
So,
yeah, and it's one of those things where you might not think it's that severe because you're looking for, we'll call it pie plate accuracy or whatever. Well, compound that with a mistake or two, and now you've got a recipe for disaster where you've went from 3 inches to the right to 7, we'll say, or something along those lines.
at a longer range. Yeah.
So, for example, what you were just saying, have your bubble off. So let's pretend we're perfectly adjusted. So this makes perfect sense for everybody. Let's say you have a third axis, you're a world-class archer, and it's perfectly set up right? Well, when you bring that bubble, just a half a bubble off or a third a bubble off or whatever, and then you torque your bow a little bit, well, now we've got shit's about to go down.
You
Could
would
be
notice
bad.
you would notice a difference.
Yeah.
In a tree, 15 yards, at a steep downhill, if you miss a doe, if you're off an inch,
Yeah.
you probably won't even notice it.
Yeah.
Because depending on which way that inch is, if you're just an inch back from the shoulder and you end up harvesting that doe and you go look at the wound, man, I hit her right on the dot.
Yeah. Yep.
Because there is no 11 or 12 ring,
Right.
or there's no little spot, an
And her
X ring
skin's relaxed now and all that.
You'd never notice it.
But now make that a yearling doe or a fawn at 30.
Yeah.
And now, or 35. That's what was interesting to us is the difference in that normally was between an X or an 11, bullseye, whatever you want to call it, or a 10, until you get out there to 30, 35 yards. Every once in a while, they'd throw one over max yardage, 36, 37, 38 yards. You get into those 30 to 38 yard ranges, and now you're talking about an 8, sometimes a 5, flirting on the line with a 5. And in that instance, you're either talking about the front of the shoulder or way back there in the liver, gut area, something along those lines.
Yeah.
So,
or if you're out west,
Yeah,
say on a
oh my
mountainside,
God. Yes.
and you're looking down at I don't know what does a mountain goat hunt go for?
Oh my God.
And you've got a mountain goat way down below you at 50 yards. Now your third axis is going to be important.
Yep.
That's where you'll really
and
notice.
One thing that also blew my mind that I learned in competition that you really don't quite understand, you could be standing perfectly flat on a flat little bench, and so you're on this bench, right? And then the hill goes this way, and you'd notice your bubble's like buried
Yeah.
when you draw your bow back, and you would basically have to you'd have to parallel the hill with your bow essentially and draw back that way. That way it would come to level when you got the full draw. It's absolutely insane.
It's the optical illusion because your ground is not level.
Yeah.
And many, many years, the world championships have always been, not always, but very frequently at a ski resort.
Yes.
And
Set up a lot like tack.
They would put you in the middle of the ski slope, and you're shooting straight across, and so you're facing the hill, very steep, and your eye sees the ground here to your right, coming in at this angle, and so you would just naturally, your bow is going to want to tip because your eye says level is, your brain is saying the ground's here, and you almost feel like you're going to want to fall forward to really get that bow to be level and shoot across that ski slope like that. So
some of the footing specifically at the World Championship at what is it, snowshoe in West Virginia. I could be wrong, but I think that was like 4,000 feet elevation or something.
Yeah, I think snowshoe gets up to 4,500.
It's up there. I had no idea West Virginia had mountains that tall.
Yeah.
But I remember specifically a black bear where I had the hill coming down this way. So I'm leaning like this, drawing my bow into the hill, but then it was severely uphill.
Yeah.
So it was a freaking nightmare. And if I couldn't imagine, had I been just a little off, I mean, it would be bad.
They will use the terrain to make life difficult.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
So third axis is pretty important. If you don't mess with it, might be something you want to think about. And it's not for everybody. Not everybody's shooting, even past 25 yards. But it could help you if you're somebody that's looking to be better with bow hunting and increase your accuracy, especially at longer distance, and you involve terrain or you're getting up in trees, might be something to look into.
And even if you do set, in the shop, set your third axis, the human variable is always a big component.
Absolutely.
Even if you get it set and it's nails in the vise in the shop, go out and shoot it.
Absolutely.
Go out and try it.
Test it out.
Get on your deck, get up in a stand, climb up on your roof, out of the rafters of the barn, something. Shoot at a downward steep angle and just see, if I'm level and I hit that, okay, my third axis set for me is working. So.
One thing, so I've heard, I want to say maybe it was Brendan Reyes, the Excel Sights guy. Mm-hmm. I think he shoots like Open Pro or something. They sell a little contraption that you can put your sight in and adjust all that, which is pretty cool. Now, his contention is that it's good. Talk to Gillingham, and he wants it tested at full draw.
Absolutely.
So I've actually never put my bow in a vise to set that up, to make my adjustment. I have, so something's holding my bow, but I've always held it. Now, I don't draw it. I just hold it up, because once you get everything level, what you'll do is you'll hold it down at a 45 and up at a 45 and make sure everything's lined up. We'll have to do a video on this.
Yeah, my vise has multiple levels. Yeah. And so I get all of those level, and then I get the levels on the bow level. I have levels all over the place.
That's what I need next.
And then I can just tip it forward.
Yeah.
And as long as all of the levels stay level as I tip it forward, then I know it's pretty good.
Yep.
But I'm still going to go out and get at an elevated position and shoot down. And make sure it's still doing all right.
Yeah, I've got the bicycle holder for now, so I don't have like a true bow vise.
Oh,
I stick the front bar in there and let her rip.
Yeah.
So, next subject we wanted to talk about is arrow setup. I feel like dealing with a lot of people online and again, getting to start off as a 100 billion% complete noob, and then get into the local 3Ds, and then, transition into competing nationally and doing fairly well there and everything. It's very interesting to me at the amount of knowledge that's out there, but people still don't have. So we were talking about it earlier. We always feel like since we know, everybody else knows. You forget that everybody else doesn't know. So first and foremost, because this is a pet peeve, Rick, the number on your arrow, 300, 350, Easton, I believe goes 340, 400, and so on. That is not a weight in any way. That is not a weight. That is not the weight of your arrow. One more time, the number on your arrow is never the weight of your arrow. Generally, each company has shafts, and they'll come in 32 inches, 31, 31 and a half, whatever. And they are tested at they basically are, they have the spine measured. Would that be the right way to put that? So they measure the spine.
And the way they do that is they take the full length shaft, they support it at two ends, and they hang a weight in the middle. And the amount of bend that weight produces on the arrow, that will be its spine.
Okay. And that's the
static spine.
That is the static spine.
So the larger the number, the bigger the dip. Generally.
Yeah.
The larger that number is. So a 500, that means that arrow bent a half inch. 0.5 inches. So that's going to be a weaker spined arrow than one that's a 250, because a 250 only dipped a quarter inch, so it's stiffer.
Yeah.
To add to that confusion, there have been in the past, for years and years, I've been a fan of a particular arrow shaft that numbered their arrows that had nothing to do. The number they gave them was the opposite. So, for example, if you got an arrow that was a 200, it was a lighter, weaker arrow.
That's why I brought it up a
Yes.
second ago.
Yeah.
It's so annoying.
And the 400 was a really heavy, stiff, everything being
Yeah.
equal. But you had to look, though, it would say this arrow that's a 400, this is its spine.
Yeah.
And so the 400 was basically a 300 spine. And the 300 was, 359. And the 200 was your 400 spine. It just was totally
Super annoying.
yeah. And you can understand how people can get confused.
Absolutely.
You grab that arrow and go, oh, well, I'm only shooting 52 pounds. And so I probably need a 400 spine arrow. And then you walk up and you see this arrow that's a 400. Well, that particular manufacturer, doesn't number
Who was
them that way.
Is that Carbon Express?
Nah, that was your PSE Radio X Weaves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remembered specifically seeing that, and it threw me for a loop.
And they're great, tough arrows. When I say I have piles of those Radio X Weaves. and I still hunt with them today. I don't think they make them anymore, but I mean, they're one of the toughest. Your 6 millimeter internal diameter, your .24, some of the toughest carbon arrows that I've ever played with, and so that's why I bought them, many of them.
So let's roll. So we talked about static tune, or excuse me. Oh my God, Chris.
Static
spine. Now let's talk about the dynamic spine so people can understand that a little bit.
So static meaning stationary.
Stationary, yes.
Dynamic is when this is what the spine is when your complete arrow is being shot.
Yeah.
When it's under motion, when it's being pushed from behind.
Okay.
And there are things that you can do that can change static. If you cut, everybody knows if you've ever broken sticks, a longer stick is easier to break than a shorter stick.
Yep.
Right. So a shorter arrow will be stiffer, even statically, it will be stiffer. But it will also stiffen the dynamic spine. So if you are looking at whatever your spine number is, so you get a 300 spine arrow and you shorten it, well, it's still going to be stiffer. So this is where your spine charts will come into play. Your spine charts will tell you, if you have an arrow that is this long and you are at this draw weight, this is the arrow spine that you're going to look for. And as those arrows get shorter, if the draw weight doesn't change, those arrows get shorter, then it's going to call for a weaker spined arrow.
Yep.
There is, then I almost got ahead of myself. So you put weight on the front of the arrow, and that is going to affect. It has nothing to do with static spine, but it will have a lot to do with the dynamic spine. And as soon as that bow starts to push that arrow from the back and all that weight is out front, that's going to deliver a force on the arrow that's going to cause it to want to bend. And if the arrow is too weak, then it's going to bend a lot. And if it's too stiff, then it doesn't want to bend, and that energy's got to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it's going to usually end up into a floppy, an erratic flight. So there is a fine line that you want to dance.
Absolutely.
At that. So depending on what you're going to put out front, I have found that the spine chart on the Serious Archery page is extremely useful because it's not just a 2-point graph, it's a 3-point graph. And so it allows you to put in not only the length of the arrow, the poundage that you're going to draw, it also lets you put in the tip weight that you're going to have.
Which is huge. And
which is going to be
I don't hardly ever see anybody else include that. It's super frustrating.
Most of them are going off the basis that you're going to have 100 grains up front.
Yeah. You're 116 or what with their insert.
Whatever, a 12 grain insert or 11, whatever those inserts are going to go.
So let's roll right into that since we're there already. So FOC, weight forward, weight up front, all that. As far as FOC goes, that's forward of center weight. So if you were to hold your finger up, put an arrow on it, if your FOC was, well, I don't really know how to describe it.
All right,
But
so
yeah, I'll let you do it.
your FOC is a percentage of the arrow length, the full length of the arrow. What's the percentage that the fulcrum or balance point is ahead of the measured center of the arrow?
There it is.
So I've answered that question once or twice before. So what you would do is you measure your arrow, and if this is an arrow you're going to hunt with, you want your broadhead on there. You want your lighted knock if you're going to use a lighted knock. All of these will factor in where that fulcrum is going to be, that balance point is going to be. The more weight you have up front, the further the fulcrum is going to be in front of the measured center of the arrow. The more weight you have on the back, the more it's going to bring that fulcrum closer to the measured center. And there are many schools of thought about the ideal FOC that you want. But the way you find it is you measure the full length of the arrow, you divide that in half, put a mark right in the would be the dead center of the arrow, and then you simply balance that arrow until both ends are nice and balanced on the thinnest thing you can balance it on. I like to use an opened pocket knife.
Okay.
Cradle it in between the blade and the handle of the pocket knife, and then that's about as thin as I can get it. And then try to get it to balance on that. And wherever it balances, you take a pencil, make another mark, and then you simply you measure the distance between your pencil mark that is dead middle and the pencil mark that is the fulcrum.
Okay.
And then you take that distance, divide that by the full length of the arrow, and that's your FOC. That's your percent front of center. Your fulcrum is front of center if you're measured.
I know we told you guys that you got to be done with this shit after 12th grade, but that was kind of a little mini math class there. But I hope that makes sense for everybody. It's pretty, to me, I find it to be fairly important for helping to kind of punch through things, drive the arrow a little bit, steer it, whatever you want to call it. Not really steer it. I would say drive more than anything. But the fun part of that is if you have a pretty decent FOC, that generally means you've got a little beef in the front of your arrow. So I talked in, I believe it might have been our second to last podcast. It wasn't the last one because that was on rifles. But I basically had sort of a theory on a lot of the heavier arrow guys that are shooting some pretty extreme stuff. And I think that a lot of them experience what they experience because they have a beefier head. They have an outsert of some sort or a half out or whatever on the front of that arrow. They don't just have a shitty little piece of aluminum that, could be crushed, no problem once it contacts anything other than skin. And then, you're generally going to have a fairly stiff arrow to hold all that. So you've got a thick-walled, stiff arrow, and by the time it gets to that deer, it's not flexing for the most part like it was when it left the bow. So you've got, a glorified dowel rod flying at that deer with a beefy head on it and everything. So your integrity, the arrow doesn't break down upon impact.
Yeah.
And so, they're not seeing what guys that are shooting super dainty setups are.
And so a couple of things that I've, in my experience, before I started, when I started, it was aluminum arrows.
Yeah.
Carbons were just starting to come out on the market, and they were all unidirectional fiber.
Okay.
So they weren't as tough.
Yeah.
And they were skinny.
Yep.
And we were playing that game of trying to get fatter arrows, catch lines,
Yeah.
And so, a long story short, I ended up with an aluminum arrow I wanted to 3D with, and I wanted it, I had this poundage, and so I just kept changing the weight out front to get that arrow lighter. And I ended up with an arrow that had about 6% FOC.
Jesus.
So that means, the balance point and the fulcrum and the middle of the arrow were really close together.
Yeah.
And they did not fly well at at long range.
Yeah.
You know, at 30 yards, I didn't really notice the difference. But if I was at 40 and I had even the gentlest crosswind, it caused problems. So I used to, for a 3D arrow, I used to try to get somewhere around that 9 to 10%.
Okay.
And there I'm balancing trajectory and balance with, you know, I wasn't worried about penetration on a 3D target. But I did learn that arrow deflection when hitting someone else's arrow was noticeable.
Absolutely.
Especially if I don't know if they're that popular anymore, but the pin knocks used to be very
Oh my
popular.
God.
And I remember at the World Championships, you know, I'm fighting to stay in it. And we had a black buck target. This was before Reinhardt's, is when we were still shooting McKenzie's.
Okay.
And it was the African black buck. I mean, 26, 27 yards.
So everybody's in there.
So, you know, one of the guys in front of me puts
What class?
it's MBR.
MBR?
It's MBR.
Oh, okay. So at least you were probably, man.
No lens back then.
Yeah.
No lens in MBR. So no magnification, but I could see the 11.
Sure.
And, you know, here I'm trying to catch up. You know, I'm wanting as many 11s as I can get. And somebody puts their arrow right in the 11, you know, a nice big fat 23 series arrow. And it's sitting in the middle of the 11. And I said, well, shoot at that arrow. You know, that's where the 11 is. And I hit, I mean, had it been a normal arrow, I probably would have tubed him. I mean, I blew up that arrow. Pin was bent. I mean, I blew it up for an 8. Kicked me right out into the 8 at 26, 27 yards. So it really kicked it out there. So, you know, I thought, well, that really sweet shot just cost me 3 points. So then we thought maybe I want to put a little bit more weight up front to help keep that arrow on path. And your indoor spot guys, number one, because they're shooting big, fat, stiff arrows.
Yes.
They're all, I mean, you talk to them, and they all have a lot of weight out front
Yeah.
because they fly better, and they need to weaken that because those arrows are bigger round and typically are going to have a stiffer spine. Dynamic spine, they want to weaken it by putting all that. So they'll put a 200 grain, 250 grain glue-in point up front. Wow. So.
But it doesn't really matter because it's 20 yards and you know it's 20 yards. And
but they like the grouping and consistency and flight characteristics by getting that weight up front.
Okay. So.
As far as a setup, you know, happy medium, you know, is a good 12 to 13.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with 15 or 18.
Yeah.
But once you start to get past that 15, it gets hard to get an arrow up over that. It's really hard to get. Once you hit 15, you got to really work.
You got to
getting
work
that arrow up there to that 20% mark.
Until these damn Easton arrows came out.
Yeah.
They're unreal. I don't know if you've done much research on them yet or not, but so I'm literally just under 20% FOC. And when I say just under 20, I'm at like 19.95. Yep. So I'm 20% FOC with 171 grains up front, but I also have a 3.5 inch arrow.
Yeah.
It's a crossbow bolt. It's 25.5 inches. So, but I've got 171 grains up front. And I think I mentioned this part in our last archery podcast as well. Me and Luke threw a bunch of weight up front. Not a bunch like, you know, the indoor guys, but I think we had like 140, 150 grains up front in a unknown, 3D, which it was easy though, because we shot those gold tips and they were always 300 spine. So you really had to throw something up there to weaken it, especially at our short draw length. Right. So we shot 5 or 6 grains over spec, which for those of you that don't know, if you're pulling 70 pounds, that means you would have 350 grains to work with. That's the minimum that they recommend you shoot and that they allow you to shoot. So
You have to have 5 grains of
Yeah.
arrow weight for every pound of draw weight.
Yep. So we noticed right away. People noticed because you'd get into those indoor shoots, and as soon as you know
Yeah.
one of the targets, you know them all, and so people are running them into those 11s, and we would slam right into the back of those arrows, and they're all shooting what Grip's talking about. They've got a little bushing on the back of the arrow. Instead of just sticking a plastic knock in there, they have this little metal bushing that has like a dome, and it's got just this tiny little
post
that comes out the back, and you put a tiny ass little beautiful fitting on your string and the arrow knock on there. And so when people hit that, the idea is they deflect and don't wreck your arrow. And then, of course, you're, kind of screwing your competition a little bit. So we noticed that we would kind of drive through that a lot and not deflect and kick. So we'd hang on in the 10. There were multiple times where we hung on in the 11. But I got your same story. I had a black wolf uphill max yardage at the World Championship.
Yeah.
And while I still had a shot at the end, you could say that arrow cost me. There was an arrow on so if you were to go to the 9 o'clock of the 10 ring and put an arrow inside looking out and outside looking in, both on the line like that at the 9 o'clock of the 10, I hit this arrow and this arrow, broke them both, and went into the 8. And so it was like really rough. After I thought about that target a lot.
Should have held a little higher.
Yeah,
you'd been fine.
Yeah. But so I should have went a little rider is what I should have done.
Little bit of
a little more
rightness
rider, and we would have been
Yeah.
great. So lastly on this subject, I feel like when it comes to arrow setup, there's a lot of people that don't really play around much or put much thought into their fletching setup and orientation. So why don't you maybe talk a little bit about that, and I'll just kind of feed off what you say.
All right. Well, traditionally, there's been the most popular has been the 3 fletch.
3 fletch right helical.
Very popular. And you can, if you are going to get into your own fletching, your options are you can go straight fletch. You can do, which does not give any spin. It just stabilizes the back end. You can do offset, or you can do a helical. Mm-hmm. And the offset it's just going to glue it at a slight angle. The helical actually is a little more aggressive and is going to have more of a spiral look to it than just kind of kicked.
Yep.
Where an offset. And of course, you can do left offset, and you can do left helical and right offset, and however you want to do. There has been here recently a lot of, with the advent of your slow-mo cameras, there has been a lot of talk about the natural cast that a bow will have. In a bare shaft situation, you shoot it will, depending again on right or left-handed and the string, wherever the string came from. I think most strings are spun and are twisted in the same way that they naturally want that arrow to twist left.
Yeah. I've never had an arrow clock right out of my bow.
Yeah. Studies have shown, and I've seen a couple. I know Nate Average Jack did an interesting video on
He's
this.
Awesome.
PJ Riley did a good one on that a while back. And if you have a bow that is naturally casting the arrow with a left turn, and you fletch it with a right offset or a right helical, it takes a momentary pause. And once the knock leaves the string, there's just a momentary pause of no spin, and then it immediately starts to spin.
Yeah.
Again, you would never notice this with the naked eye. So the gist of it is, it don't really matter.
Yeah.
You go You go with what you want. Of course, the hard and fast rule is if you are shooting a single bevel broadhead, you want to make sure if you have a right bevel, then you are shooting either a right offset or a right helical fletch,
Okay.
because your blade, because it's, the profile of that blade is not even. It is a slanted surface.
Yeah.
It is going to impart spin as well. So a right bevel.
So you'd have opposing forces,
Yes.
essentially.
Yeah, and that's not good.
No.
So if you have a right bevel, then you're going to want right offset or right helical. And of course, if you're left bevel, you want.
Okay.
So some broadhead companies will sell right and left bevels. Some, nope, we're just right bevel. So you just fletch accordingly. If you're shooting a double bevel broadhead, fixed bladed head, or of course, any mechanical broadhead, then it doesn't matter. You can have right or left either way you want. Your 3 versus 4, things to consider if you're really chasing that FOC, then you want to go with 3, because 4, obviously, all things being equal, 4 fletch obviously is going to weigh more than 3.
Yeah.
That's going to put more weight on the back end. If you are really, really chasing the FOC, then you want to go with real feathers.
Okay.
Real feathers are much lighter than plastic veins.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
So if you're wanting to get every fraction of a percentage of that FOC that you can, and you don't want a lighted knock, you don't want wraps, you want the lightest possible material on the back of your arrow, and all the heavy stuff is up front.
That makes sense.
I used to, just by sheer accident, I jokingly say that I invented the blazer vein. The reason is I used to shoot 3-inch parabolic feathers in 3D, and I damaged one. It broke the front end off. And being a poor, early in my career,
Oh, yeah.
I was going to get every penny of money out of those fletchings that I could. So I didn't refletch it. So I had one feather that was half, only the back half. And I had 2 that were the full 3, and I shot it, and it grouped with all the others, So I thought, well, why don't I just take the front half off those other 2 so it looks good. And lo and behold, man, those real feathers, those 3-inch parabolics with the front half cut off, they look a whole lot like blazer veins. And, I went to the 3D course. Then I started buying 3-inch parabolic, and I was cut them in half and gluing them on that way.
Wow.
And people go, what do you got there? What do you got? And I told the whole story, and lo and behold, a couple years later, blazer veins hit the market. I don't know,
Somebody from Boning was scoping your ass out, weren't they?
Well, I'm still waiting on that royalties check.
There you go. Don't hold your breath on that.
I will not hold my breath.
So let's move on to, which, by the way, I've got that 20% FOC with a 4 fletch arrow. That ain't bad. Let's talk.
Easton might be onto something there. With that shaft,
Dude, it's unreal.
and that's a 5. It's a 204 inside diameter.
204 ID, 5mm arrow. It's unreal. Like because we've added up numbers a billion times as comp guys and everything. So when you're going through your setup, you're adding up how many inches your shaft's going to be, and then or how many inches, and then multiplying that by the grains per inch that your arrow comes in, and then you're looking at all your components, your knock, your fletchings, everything, and adding that all up, and you're like, oh wow. And then you get to add generally 100, 125, whatever it is, and that's your tall TAW total arrow weight, right? Well, I started adding it up, and it wasn't even at 400 grains, and I was like, nah, I screwed that up. There's no way. I messed
Clearly,
that up.
I've done the math wrong.
And so I did it again, and I arrived at 382 again. And so I did it one more time, and I was at 382. And so
wow.
I was at 382, and then with all the glues and everything, I'm at 388. So roughly 5 grains in glue, which is kind of cool. But so let's talk. Let's go full Plaxico Burris AI on it. Let's talk about practice.
Oh yeah.
why do you feel that practice is a good topic to talk about when thinking about overlooked subjects with bow hunting?
Is it okay if I get biological?
Yes.
All right, good. The I may ruffle a few,
Ruffle.
but there's no
Piss 'em
such
off.
there's no this is and kind of this is semantics, but there's no such thing as muscle memory.
Okay.
Your muscles don't remember a damn thing.
Okay.
They are mindless automatons that do what they're told when they're told at the intensity that they're told. So all of that's controlled by the nervous system.
Okay.
And we practice so that when buck fever hits and that adrenaline dump empties in, your brain is going to go to what it knows best. And if that neural pathway that you have established with your practice is burned in, that's the pathway your brain is going to take.
Okay.
If anyone out there has ever had buck fever and they just fell apart, then you haven't practiced enough. And I can go into a little bit more anatomical. So everyone here, whenever, it doesn't matter what it is, if you've ever tried to play guitar and you watch someone play guitar who knows how to play, or play the drums, or the first time you drove a car, or cast a fishing rod, it doesn't matter. The first time you did it, it was probably pretty awkward.
Yes.
The more you did it, the more comfortable you become. Then that's because you've done it over and over and over and over again. And you have used that same neurological pathway so many times that your neurons, your nerve cells, have a sheath that is called the myelin sheath.
Okay.
And the more that the timing and the orientation and the order and the intensity that electrical signal travels down that neuron, the more that action is used, the thicker that myelin sheath becomes, and it becomes a path of least resistance for that neurological signal. And so when it hits the fan and, fight or flight kicks in, and, we've all been in conversations where, because you kind of lose it a little bit. You lose your...
Absolutely.
You ever been in an argument and you got heated and you were hot?
Every time.
And then when you calm down and you got about 10 minutes out of it and you calmed down and you went, I should have said that.
Yeah.
Because you were so fired that your witty part of your brain wasn't working, because it's all animal instincts,
Dang.
And so that's all part of it. When you're there and that big boy walks in front of you and, your heart rate jumps and the adrenaline dumps, that's fight or flight characteristic. Now you're going into that animal part of your brain. And if you haven't burned that shot sequence into your neural pathway, the odds of you screwing up due to buck fever have greatly increased. If you have, I can do that in my sleep. We always make the joke, I've driven to work so many times, man, I can drive it in my sleep. Well, because you've done it. You've done this particular activity so many times, and it is so burned into your neural pathway that it's gonna happen because it's the path of least resistance for your brain to tell your muscles to do that task. My dad, he won't hear this. He doesn't listen to podcasts, so I can tell a story on him. When I got into bow hunting and deer hunting, he was the rabbit hunting guy. And then a few years later, he said, well, man, I want to do deer hunting, And he went out and he went to Kentucky with us, and he got his first year with a rifle in Kentucky, and he said he was going to do, well, I used to shoot a bow as a kid, so we went, got him a bow. I got him set up, and, we're in the backyard, and he's shooting, and he's, pie plate at 20, 25 yards. And he goes, well, all right, man, I'm good. I said, well, you got to practice. Oh, yeah. So he didn't practice.
Oh.
And he went out to went out hunting, and he's in the stand. You know, it's late October, early November. Lo and behold, here comes a buck, and he was on this hillside with a bench system. You know, that the terrain was just a level of benches all the way down the hill, and he's on one bench, Buck's on the next bench below him, and he wasn't up very high. You know, Buck walks in. He goes, I drew and I just forgot what to do. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I went, and he used to shoot a recurve, you know, just playing around as a kid, as a gym teacher. You know, they had the little archery unit in gym, and, you know, he shot that was the bow that he had practiced with the most. And so guess what he did? He tried aiming down the arrow, and then he said, I'm looking at the arrow. And they said, oh, I remember, I got a peep sight. And, you know, and he brought his hand down and he tried to find the peep sight, and he ended up shooting behind the buck.
Man.
That is how bad he missed. And that is a classic example of not practicing and not burning that shot sequence into your neural pathway and getting it so ingrained that that's what the right shot sequence is going to happen regardless of how worked up you get.
That makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
I don't really have much to add to that.
Well,
That's it. It's funny too, because when I practice a lot during deer season, but not like during the off season. I'll shoot a quiver of arrows or something before I head out to hunt, just to check everything and make sure, you know, I'm doing my job or whatever. But once I get through deer season, and then we get, you know, a couple of months now that I don't compete with you guys anymore, you know, I'll take a while off from shooting my bow. And when you go out there, it's just a bunch of little things that need cleaned up and everything. And you're just not doing it like you would. And you almost never make that mistake when you're practicing. So,
well, and I think that's why 3D is important.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
if you're just going to the locals.
Yep.
And shooting, even if you just go to the local club and shoot the league, you know, once a week. And if you can add pressure.
Yeah.
You know, throw a couple bucks.
Bro.
Throw a couple bucks on it.
At the National Triple Crown with the shoot off that they do on Saturday night.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go on a tangent for a second. So I've heard a lot of people talk about how target shooting is a lot easier than hunting because you don't have the pressure. Well, go have 100 or 200 people standing there watching you and stand toe to toe with another dude, and you're both going to shoot a target. It's a March Madness situation, right? Winner moves on, loser gets the hell out of Dodge, and you're shooting for $2,000. And now, $2,000 would be nice.
Yeah.
6 years ago, $2,000's going to change my life.
Really nice.
So I'm going to come home and my wife's going to love me a little more, we'll say. So
can I tell you a quick indoor story?
Yes.
So, you know, back when I was shooting a lot of spots, this was before my son was born, and my wife said, well, I'd like to try it. So we got her set up, and that's the whole story in itself. But we got her set up, and so we shot a mixed couples league on Friday night at the local shop. It's not open anymore, but, you know, it's Steve's. And this every Friday night we shot. And she said, well, you know, we were shooting, a lot of us were all shooting in preparation for the state championship, the Blueface championship.
Okay.
And she was just shooting with us. And then so she started to get better. And she said, well, maybe I'll try to qualify. And so once she decided that there was a competition on the line, I mean, I'm competitive, but my wife is a whole other level of competition. I mean, she goes all out.
I like it.
They have an ugly sweater contest at school. She's winning it because she will make sure that she has the ugliest sweater. You know, I mean, that's the way she is. And so no children. You know, we've just been married a few years. We get home from work, we're just sitting there, and she goes, "We'll go up Steve's and shoot." I said, "Hell yeah, I want to go
I
up Steve's
love
and
you.
shoot." So we shot a complete blueface round every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Jesus.
So that's probably why that during that year I was averaging, 300. I was averaging about 58, 57, 58 X's, which I don't know if you're familiar with a blueface. That's a 60 arrow.
Yeah.
That's an inch. That's an inch and a half X ring at 20 yards.
So you're missing 2 to 3 times.
Yes.
Out of 60.
And that was what I averaged.
And more than likely you're missing by a hair, not by much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever shot a 60?
One time.
One time?
One time.
Okay.
And I have witnesses. I can call them. Yeah. And the funny part was I don't want to ruin the book for you, but it came up. Oh my God! Look, all that.
Two-time published author right here.
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
So anyway, I shot 3 times. I shot 3 times a week, 60, 70 arrows. You figure your quote unquote warm up rounds.
Warm up is 2 ends.
Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so we get to the state championship. And so I'm averaging 58. And the week before we left, I shot 60. The one and only time I shot 60 X's.
Wow.
So I'm rolling into Portsmouth at Shawnee State. We shot at Shawnee State University.
Okay.
We shot in the competition gym. And back then, they shot 4 different lines, 8 o'clock noon Saturday, 8 o'clock noon on Sunday. And it was wall-to-wall target butts from baseline to baseline on the basketball court. And we shot across the basketball court. And I mean, it was wall-to-wall people, top line, bottom line.
And you're nuts to butt when you're doing this.
Yeah, you are.
You're
There's
closer than he are.
Yeah.
He and I are right now.
There's no internal bubble sensitivity.
No.
I mean, you're right there.
Yeah.
So we get to shooting, and I'm dropping X's because I'm a little torqued up, but I got a lot of practice in it. So I ended up shooting 300 with 52 X's.
Okay.
And I thought, man, I gave it away. Well, it turns out the guy who won shot 53, and someone else shot 52 X's. So we have a shoot-off. And typically when they do a shoot-off, all the people who tied in all of the classes, they just move everybody to the middle, and everybody shoots their shoot-off. Guess how many people had a shoot-off for that line?
How many?
2, me and the other guy.
Oh, so
was it.
everyone is watching.
That was it. It was just the 2 of us. So they moved us to the mid-court. There are only 2 blue-face targets on all of those butts. And I shot the 8 o'clock line. So all the people for the noon line were coming in to get ready to shoot. So there was probably, 400-600 people in the gym. Now,
Damn.
They called us down. They said, "Oh, you gonna get to shoot off?" And he said, "No, we'll give you 5 warm-ups, and then we'll shoot for score." And the guy goes, "Do we got to shoot warm-up?" I could already tell I want to get out of here. I'm uncomfortable down here in front of all these people. And he goes, I said, "No, I don't need. I just shot 300. I probably don't need to move anything. I'm probably good." So he goes, "Yeah, we'll start for score." So I stood there and I went, "Okay, don't look at his target.
Yeah.
You got to shoot 5 X's."
Yep.
So first arrow, man, I come back, I get anchored in. That pin, that sight pin was going, boop, 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 boop. I mean, it was wobbling. I mean, it was not steady. But, aim and squeeze, hold in the middle, aim and squeeze, X. Hit that first one, okay, X,
Calms
X.
you down.
The last one, still haven't looked. I shoot X. Guy's at full draw. He lets down. He's shooting a hinge. He lets down. Yeah. He's still. And then he actually turned to the crowd and goes, "Hey, Rob, you come down here and shoot this for me." And then a buddy of mine was in the seat. He goes, "It don't matter, man. He already beat you." And I thought, I haven't even looked. I thought, I'm not, etiquette. I'm not going to look. I'm not going to look. I pull my binos out and look. And he had already dropped an X. And so he went ahead and shot that last one.
That's
so
badass.
I ended up taking second for the OAA Blueface. But had I only shot once a week,
Yeah.
I guarantee that those nerves would have got me, and I'd have dropped another X, or who knows how many
Yeah,
X's.
you'd have been like him. The
Yeah.
way you describe him,
But
he was
because
tore up before you
because
even started.
I was shooting 200 arrows a week.
Yeah.
Burn that neural pathway, get it burned in, and the shot will take care of itself.
Amen to that. Well, there you go. Practice. You gotta do it a lot. A lot of times, I'll at least shoot an arrow
Yeah.
before I go hunt, even if it's in the dark. I don't care. I'll put a light on the target. I want to know that nothing has been screwed up. You never know when something gets caught on a bush on Saturday night and then you're going Sunday morning or what. Anything can happen.
I carry one arrow in my quiver that either has a field point or a junk broadhead or a small game point, judo point, something like that. And I almost every time, if I hunt in the morning before I leave, I'll take a shot, practice shot. If I go in the afternoon, unless I'm pushing a bedding area or that kind of thing, if I feel that I'm far enough away, I'm not going to disturb anything. As soon as I get set up, I take a practice shot.
Yeah.
Before that hunt starts.
That's not a bad idea.
That's your grips tip for
Grips
this
tips,
episode.
baby. Yep. Just the tip. So next, let's talk about different target scenarios. We've got lighting, angles, how alert the deer is, the maturity / body size of the deer. I think that's pretty important to bring up as well. So let's kind of get into that a little bit and talk about the knowledge behind and oftentimes experience in those situations can help.
Yeah. Angles, of course, most of the time we're going to be in an elevated position. So, the old adage is you want to aim for your exit hole.
Yep.
So that means if you're, that's going to hold true for quartering away. If you're confident in your abilities and your setup to take a quartering to, or if the situation is right, a straight on. I know there are people who will say that, you should never ever take that shot. I've done it once.
Yeah, I've done it quite a few times.
I was on the ground.
Yeah.
And I had a very aggravating doe at 14 yards standing right on, and I thought, okay, I can make that one. And,
Bet you're going to get it.
And I let her have it. And she did not go far.
Who's blowing now?
She did. Yeah. Yeah. It worked out well for me.
Yeah.
So again, you're way up there. You're going to want to come in a little high on the animal so that you're on the appropriate exit hole. Those rings on the 3D targets are great, but they're usually only good for broadside dead level.
Yep.
You don't
Ground hunt situation.
Yeah, and it's tricky, on a 3D course when you're shooting downhill to shoot for where that ring is and not for where the bow hunter in your tells you where you want that arrow to be. So
Yeah.
when if you are out and doing that 3D practice, take that into consideration. I feel that's kind of stating the obvious, but it's still just out there. And then of course, if you are, and we talked about the difference. A 2-year-old doe is easier to get an arrow through than a 5-year-old mature rutted up buck.
Sure.
I mean, those are, and I know I'm guilty of this. The overwhelming majority of the deer that I've killed have been does and younger bucks. And when you repeatedly shoot clean through all those animals, you think your setup it can take care of anything. And I can tell you by experience that that's not the case. That a 225 pound on the hoof rutted up buck is that target is harder to get through than a smaller doe. So if that's what you're targeting, or if you're just hunting a larger species, say for example, if you're going out west and you're hunting elk, you might want to worry about that FOC and your arrow velocity and everything to get that energy up. get that momentum. Momentum is the key.
Sure.
You want that arrow to keep going after it because arrows are not bullets. Bullets plow through, arrows cut.
Yep.
Bullets can damage tissue they never touch. Arrows can't. That broadhead has to touch it to damage it.
Yep.
And so you want to make sure you are touching as much as you can. Either that be as wide as you can or as deep as you can or both. Really wide and all the way through. That's the best case scenario.
That makes sense.
So those are the biggest keys is just knowing your target, knowing your angles. Experience does help. I know alert deer inside of probably 35 yards are going to move.
Oh, yeah.
So, that is something to think about. I have not shot at many deer over 30 yards. I did have one of my best bucks was at 41, and I don't have enough data to prove this, but I think at anywhere starting to get close to 40, I think that's that comfort zone.
Yeah.
That they feel far enough away that they don't
I think there's a lot of people that believe in that same thing.
that they react as much.
Yeah.
Whether it's bow going off or the arrow zipping, they can hear the arrow coming, which is if you ever had an arrow come at you, you can hear them coming.
You can.
I don't think they react as much at 41 as they would at 31.
Sure.
I think 31 is that's their bubble. You're still in that bubble, and they're going to move. So keep that. If it's at 31, you probably ought to shoot that animal for about 25 yards.
Yeah.
And I've even done that. I had an alert doe at 30, and I shot her for 25, and all I got were 3 hairs underneath the front of my vein. That was it. She ducked, and I went right on top of her.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's rough. I think there's only one other thing in the scenarios category we were going to hit on. Lighting.
Oh, yeah. In the old days, my pins were metal.
And the tips were painted.
They had a little paint on the end. So when it got dark, it was dark, and pins were gone.
Yep.
I'll never forget my first set of fiber optic pins. Wow.
Yeah.
What a difference.
Big wow.
It made a big difference. And then you were able to put lights on them. And that is a huge difference. The one thing you want to be aware of when you turn that light on is if it's bright and it's dark outside, all you will see are pins.
Yeah.
And your target is gone.
Yeah.
So having a light that has some adjustability to it is important. And you're really only talking about the last few minutes.
Yep.
Most of and I'm sure this is true for a lot of the fiber optic pins that are out there, they're going to be pretty visible all the way up until legal shooting light is gone.
I had that happen to me on that piebald buck in Kentucky.
Yeah.
I forgot to turn it down, and literally it was like somebody had a red stoplight inside my brain.
Yeah.
And I was having such
That's
trouble.
all you see, yeah.
Oh, dude, it was nuts.
Yeah, you can overpower.
Yeah.
And that's something else I learned on the 3D course. You can be well lit out in the sun and a target's in the dark, and it can be really hard to see that target because it's your pin is bright, but that target is not, and you get that contrast, and
it's tough.
It can make a difference.
They do that a lot to you.
They do.
They'll put you in the shade, put the target in the light, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And you're playing with a bunch of shit.
So, and then back when I shot in the open class, you throw that lens in your sight.
Glare.
So here's a funny story, if I may. At Nelsonville.
I already know the story, but go ahead.
I'm going to tell it anyway. We were out on the course, and they had a target. We were, noon, sun just beating down on us. And the target was just in a hole. And, it was hard to see with the naked eye and
was
binoculars.
It a black bear?
It was a brown deer. I mean, it
Oh,
was a
wow.
regular full-size deer, but it was that dark and the sun was that bright out on us. And I had a 6-power lens, and someone made a good shot, put an orange arrow right in the kill. And so I thought, okay, I don't even need target. I just need that orange arrow. So I dialed my yardage in. I drew back, and I'm, where's that orange? And I went, oh, there's orange. And all I could see was the orange. Made the shot, and I drilled the marker ribbon for the trail. That was all I could make out, was the orange ribbon hanging there saying, take this trail to the next target, guys. I mean, and the guy next to me goes, dude, you smoked that ribbon. Because, I didn't hear an arrow hit target.
Right.
But that was, I looked through, and that was the first orange thing I found, and I shot that ribbon. So yeah, lighting can be. I would have really could have used a shade over my. That was before we started carrying stools and umbrellas.
Yeah.
So there was nobody.
Probably didn't have a sunshade.
No.
Sunshade. Yeah.
No.
That's rough.
Lessons learned.
And that's something that's pretty important. You'll every once in a while you get into a situation where your pin can kind of just disappear. You just have a weird lighting scenario. I've had it a few times, and then when I started using sight lights, I don't have it. And then when I competed in 2019, a gentleman named Alan, he created a sight light where you would run a clear fiber optic through your pins, and then you could literally change 7 different colors. You could do like
That's
white,
nice.
teal, yellow,
That's cool.
blue, green, red, purple. And so when you'd get into these different lighting situations and then different targets, like for example, the big mountain goat in the IBO, that son of a bitch reflects light like you can't imagine because it's just a bright white. And you never think about that until you aim at it and watch your green pin just disappear.
I was just going to say that when I shot open, I had to have a red pin for those white targets.
Yep.
The greens were great on the dark targets, but if you put a white target in the sun and I'm in the woods and I had a green pin, it was gone.
Dude,
I couldn't find it.
On the mountain goat, I'd switch to purple, and you could just, it was plain as day, dude. It was phenomenal. And I generally shot the blue light. I'd shoot the teal, and then every once in a while I'd go to green. But I'd literally just sit there and hold my bow up and just go through the different lights and just see which one looked best, and then I'd play with the brightness.
Never had anything that fancy.
Yeah, well,
That's
I was very lucky. A buddy of mine, Travis, hooked me up with the guy, and at the time we had the Fueled by the Outdoors group, and he's like, "Hey, do you think you could post about this a little bit?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'll send you one." Well, I told him, that there's a caveat here. Like, I can't just, like, it has to work. It can't just be a piece of shit sight light and then I sell it for you or whatever. Dude, I got that thing out. I thought that was the coolest damn thing I'd ever seen.
That's cool.
And I had never ran fibers on a sight. You talk about learning your equipment. Yeah. It was pretty nuts. But, I mean, it worked. It was a hell of an idea.
Yeah, and for hunting purposes, about the only time I'll turn a light on, with my pins, now they have 3 feet worth of fiber optic. They're pretty much going to be visible.
Yeah.
Right up until legal shooting light. But if I'm in a blind.
Yeah.
And it's dark, your pins are done. Just the faintest, lightest setting I have, just enough to make them visible, and you can still see the target. That's about the only time I will ever need a light. But you'd rather have it not need it
absolutely
than need it and not have it. So.
I had that one light. To me is still the best light ever made for target shooters, target archers. But the one that I have on my hunting bow now is called an Elvish Tack, and it is damn cool. I watched the dude run one over with a truck, didn't do anything to it, so that was cool. It's waterproof. Sank it in water, didn't hurt it, and I've hunted in freaking downpours with it, and in the snow, cold, whatever. The interesting thing is, it goes all the way up to like 15. It has 15 different power settings.
Wow!
And I've never went above 2.
Yeah.
And it it's a shake wake, So as soon as you pick your bow up,
It's
and
on.
I mean, if I were to lay my bow on the table and just go like that, it's on. Like it is highly sensitive.
That's sensitive.
Yeah. So it's really nice. And then
Yeah,
you
you don't have
can
to turn it on.
change, the time it'll stay on or whatever.
Yeah.
So it'll go off. And what's crazy to me about that sight light is, I have not ever ran the battery down. Like I've only charged it once since I bought it back in
Wow.
November. I mean, and it's
That's impressive.
sat, and I checked it the other day, and it was at 100%, and I had charged it like 2 weeks before
Wow.
I killed my buck. So kind of pretty impressed with it so
Yeah,
far.
that's nice.
Sucks that I can't take it to Colorado.
That's right.
Yeah,
They don't
like
have-
you to wound animals out there. They want you
they
to
want
wound
you.
the shit out of
They
them.
don't want you to kill them.
So
We want you to come shoot stuff. We just want you don't take it home.
just shoot it in the ass or something.
You can't take it home.
So there's a couple things left that we want to hit on, and it's not as we won't go as in depth, I think, because you could really dive in these.
I'll try.
Yeah. Anatomy and physiology teacher here, so I probably spoke too soon, but anatomy education is highly, highly, highly overlooked. I don't think people understand the different levels of trauma you cause when you hit certain organs, certain veins and arteries and muscles and everything. So why don't you maybe just kind of take the reins on this a little?
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
A little.
Yeah.
Because I do have a 1 hour.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You want no, plug it. Go ahead.
So on my channel, the Grips Archery channel, Grips with an apostrophe S.
This is going to be your most viewed video now.
It's fine by me. I wanted to do a video, and it ended up becoming two on deer anatomy and physiology, based on my knowledge as a high school anatomy and physiology teacher and zoology, and just on what I have seen as a bow hunter and as a teacher, and all the animals that I've dissected, and what I know about how the body works and how the body functions. And I wanted to do a video just going into the anatomy and physiology, and then at the end of the video, I wanted to have a few shots on deer, and then talk about, okay, this is where that animal was hit, this is what happened, this is how far it went. And I went an hour before I ever got to the shot part, So it's about a 52, 53-minute video, and I take slides from my material that I teach with in class.
Okay.
And I show pictures of human cadavers, and then I put on pictures.
I'm not watching that anymore. Never mind.
Okay, well, you don't have to. They're tastefully done.
Tastefully done. Here's a dead body.
Well, it's really just it's a top down, right through the chest, and you look down as if you were above, looking down into the chest cavity. That's the view. So it's not that bad.
So if you want to kill somebody, this is the perfect video to check out.
But anatomy and physiology wise, I think, and again, I may ruffle some feathers on this one, but I believe that when we talk about the double lung shot, I believe we get sidetracked as to why we are actually targeting the lungs. And the reason is they are, I'm going to say, if not the most densely populated with blood vessels of any organ in the body.
Okay.
And the reason is they have two sets. They have a set of blood vessels bringing oxygen poor blood to them for reoxygenation. And then they have that's called the pulmonary set. And then they have a completely different set of blood vessels that are bringing oxygen-rich blood to the tissue to fuel the tissue with oxygen itself.
Okay.
So they have both. They have two sets.
Okay.
So they are densely packed with vascular tissue.
Okay.
And that makes them a high-value target.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people are so, when they think lungs, they think respiratory system, and we get hung up on the respiratory part of taking out the lungs, and the the real reason we're targeting them is they're big and they're full of blood vessels. And if we puncture as much lung tissue as we can, that animal will bleed a lot and will die. Not to mention, between the lungs is the heart, and the largest blood vessels in the body are going to be in between those lungs as well. And I'm talking about the aorta, which is the trunk to the arterial tree, and so it is responsible for sending blood, oxygen-rich blood, to all parts of the body. It comes from the aorta. The left ventricle pumps oxygen-rich blood into the aorta, and from there, a red blood cell can go anywhere in the body. It just branches, just like branches from a tree. It's the trunk. And then also in between there is the vein, which is the counterpart to the aorta, coming from the back half of the body. It's going to run right between the lungs, is called the posterior vena cava. And it's going to be full of oxygen poor blood coming back from the back half, bringing that blood that's now been used. It's dumped off this oxygen. It's coming back for reoxygenation, and it's going to come between those lungs. And you sever any of those, and it's over. There's no coming back from that. And I think when people cut that animal open and they examine the damage, they see holes in the lungs. But because those, most people don't have the anatomical knowledge to be able to find that vena cava. Did you cut the vena cava? And I think that you cut that vena cava and you cause all that damage, we attribute that to the lungs.
Sure.
And if we did a full-blown necropsy and had, a pathologist examine that wound, that pathologist would know. He has the knowledge, this is what he does for a living. He would be able to say, well, yeah, there is lung damage, but there is also a severed vena cava, and that's the ultimate cause, of blood loss through this. This is what happened. So targeting the lungs is lethal. And as soon as you start talking cutting and blood, you're talking about the cardiovascular system.
Sure.
And if we start talking about blood trails and blood loss, we have a closed circulatory system. When everything's working right, our blood is enclosed in the heart and the blood vessels. And when things are bad, you're bleeding, you're leaking. It's now an open circulatory system. And if we open that circulatory system in those big blood vessels, death is imminent. I mean, it's going to happen. And I don't know. I really am not interested in blood trailing. If they'd hold their head still, maybe I would take headshots because, they're going to drop, but they don't do that.
Right.
The head's going to move. But taking out that component, the heart and those blood vessels, they don't go far.
Yeah.
They don't go far. And I know we've discussed the difference between, one big hole and
Sure.
two smaller holes. And again, my sample size is only about 83, 84 deer in my life. I have found that if I can get that arrow to go completely through that animal and expend as least amount of energy as possible, I mean, just zip through. That's the animal that runs a short distance, and if it hasn't passed out yet, it turns around.
Yeah.
To try to figure out what just
Wondering
happened.
what's going on.
And then great. Stand there as long as you want, and then fall over.
Right.
And then it's right there. I don't have blood trail. That's what I want. But on the flip side, if I do have to blood trail, well, I want as much blood on the ground as I can. So I get the allure of the expandable head and those big, look like you hit them with a broadsword. I get it. I understand. I've used them, but at this point in my career, I like to get through them fast, 2 holes, take out that cardiovascular system and watch them fall over. That's what I want.
I agree. Generally, when you're zipping through them like that, you get a different reaction from the deer for the most part.
Every one that I've hit and the arrow stayed in the animal, that animal went balls to the wall until they lost it.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it makes sense.
Sure.
Because, as archers, our arrows, kinetic energy wise, we don't really generate a lot. 80 pounds, that's a lot for a bow.
Yeah.
But, in the firearm world, that's not that. That's kinetic energy wise. That's basically a .22 rifle. The only animal that I've had that the arrow did not pass through and died within sight was the big 8-pointer from 2017. And the only reason he didn't go far is I completely went through his heart. And he ran, he was in front of me, and he ran a circle and ran out this way and fell over. And I ranged him at 41 yards from the tree, and I shot him completely through the heart. And the broadhead did come through, but the arrow stayed in him, and he broke it, as he ran.
Yeah.
But he ran until he fell, and luckily for me, it was only 41 yards away from the tree. But
this guy here,
yeah, center
punched the heart with a 3-blade Muzzy. Did not go all the way through. I think I probably got. I misjudged the yardage and hit him pretty low, and he ducked into it. I think I hit kind of back there on that like knuckle or whatever. Mm-hmm. He went 450 yards, and the blood was not very good. Yeah, he went a long way. So he went through the woods, out into the field, then came back, and the only way I was able to track where he had gone at all without just doing a body search was his it's still to this day I think the biggest deer for sure that I've ever killed. The only one that would rival it was the 140 I killed back in 2012, but that was 9 days into the season. He wasn't all puffed up yet. But that deer would beat the shit out of any other deer that I've ever killed in my life in a fight. He was big. So when I shot him and I heard that smack and then, watched when he buckled and took off, arrow broke. And then when I found him, I field dressed him and I'm like, I literally couldn't have center punched the heart any better. How the hell did he go that far? Now, I think the arrow was still in him. So maybe that helped. Keep the system closed, maybe.
Maybe.
So nothing was pumping, but nothing was leaking.
Something in the hole.
Yeah. But it was or maybe it just kept pumping, I guess. I don't know. It was very weird, though, you'd think, but that really makes the case for that top of the heart.
Yeah.
Don't hit the heart. Hit everything connected to it in the lungs.
Hit everything connected to it. Don't take out the roots.
And then you'll literally be able to spit on it from your tree stand, basically.
Yeah. That buck I shot just this year, late season, completely threw him. Gave him the Magnus Killer Bee, the Sarah Razor.
Okay.
Right over top of the heart. He ran about 25 yards and he stopped. And he stood there. And then as he started to lose consciousness, because that's as they lose blood, they don't get any blood to their brain and they pass out before they actually die of cardiac arrest. And so he ran out to about 25 yards and he stopped. And he's looking around. If you could read their minds, you could tell you, what the hell was that? Do I need to keep running? And then, oh man, I don't feel good. And he actually staggered back to me, and he ended up he was about Jeez. 30 yards from where I was.
Those are nice.
So yeah, it's beautiful. I ran out, just walk right out there and go get him. So, it and I don't think there's a wrong. I don't want to say that there's a wrong answer. I don't want to say that there are multiple answers to this equation that are all right and all work.
Sure.
It just depends on what works for you. maybe in my younger days, I'll go, oh, I'd scoff it because you're using this and I'm using this.
Right.
But I am not arrogant enough to say that what I'm using is right and what you're using is wrong or anyone else is wrong, especially if it's something that you've used and had success with.
Sure.
How can I say that that's wrong when like I said, I get the allure. I totally understand the argument, the point to the argument of one big hole, cut them. Like Kaiser says, big holes snatch souls.
Yeah, baby.
You can't argue with that.
No.
But there's just I think that there are multiple solutions to that problem, and they all work. So
I agree.
find something that works for you. And in your situation now, if I'm going on an elk hunt and I can only draw 52 pounds and, I only have about a 27-inch draw length, I'm probably not going to use a 2-inch expandable.
Sure.
So you got to know your situation.
Absolutely. I agree.
So
And that kind of rolls us into our last little topic here, which is tracking. I think a lot of people don't quite understand what's going on once they've hit an animal, and that's where knowing their anatomy, understanding the body language on a deer once you've hit it, watching where you last seen it, and every little tiny detail of what happened. Did you see blood on impact? Did it run out and stand and you saw blood dripping, down from the cavity or something? Yeah. Could you see where you hit it? Did you see impact of the arrow or bullet? But in this case, arrow. Because a lot of times, I'm sure you've had this, well, I'm not quite sure where I hit him. Oh, shit.
Yeah.
We were tore up to hell and back if we don't know where we hit the deer. So, I think it's very important to give a deer time.
Yes.
If you don't watch it fall or don't hear it crash, and even if you do, I mean, most people should give a deer time. If you really know your stuff, maybe you can push the envelope. I know Zach does. I do a little bit, but I generally, I've killed over 100 deer, and there's guys out there that have killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of deer, some in the thousands. And so when you have the understanding for what's going on, it makes sense. But if you're in any way sure, the whole when in doubt, back out thing.
That's a great rule.
Get the hell out, man. Yeah. Like, don't go push the envelope. So you have anything you kind of want to add to that at all?
I think the one positive to being able to film is to go back and look.
Yeah.
That's a great tool.
Yeah.
Again, adrenaline, fight or flight. They always talk about how eyewitnesses aren't as reliable, again, because it's a stressful situation and, you might not remember it the way it actually happened. But the filming will lie.
Nope.
So if you are able to, and I'm probably the world's worst self-filmer. It's hard enough to get an arrow on a deer, and you compound it with trying to get him on camera. That's why, I joke on my channel that all my deer kills are all at food because I know where the shot's going to be.
Go self-film a turkey.
No.
Oh, my God. They piss you off real bad.
Well, when I do turkey hunt, I bow hunt them, and I set my decoys out, and I point my cameras at the decoys, and that's
there
it.
You go.
I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
It's either going to happen there or that's it. All of my eggs are in that basket, so that's helpful. Some of I have been on a lot of blood trails. I've heard a lot of things that I don't necessarily think that are just, I don't want to, old timers info, bubbles in the blood. I don't necessarily
that's
think
such horse shit.
That bubbles mean,
it doesn't.
It doesn't. And the color of blood, the only time I have ever really noticed that there be a difference in the color of the blood would be, to me, it seems like whenever it's a muscle hit, that blood does seem to be a bright red, but it's all red to me.
Right.
I've never been able to look at it and go, "Bull, that's liver blood."
I can
don't.
generally tell for the most part if it's back, but if it's back, I also know that I didn't hit its shoulder because a lot of times that muscular
Yeah.
blood is a little darker. But again, it just all depends, and it's
Yeah.
so like I am more a fan of the pattern of the blood trail
Yeah.
than I am, the color. Does the color sometimes tell me something? Yeah, but I can tell you the pattern, how quick they're bleeding, how often they're bleeding, that and the pattern. Is there tiny little dots everywhere, like where there's just splatter everywhere? That generally tells me I lunged them pretty good
And then-
because they're going and
They're
they've got
blowing that
out of their mouth, out of
Yeah.
their nostrils, and then through both holes. So
Yeah.
there's blood everywhere. Those just go because you're good. When you get into the little, quarter size drops and then a fist size splotch, and then you go 15 feet, 20 feet, and you see that again, generally that tells me that I'm somewhere around the heart, where I've essentially depressurized the system or we're no longer really pumping, we're leaking,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
And pools generally mean standing still,
Yes,
bleeding, they're standing.
Yep.
Your blood splatter, it's going to have, if it's uniform, meaning the droplets around it, that's moving slower, standing still.
Yep.
If it has angles and droplets to one side, it's moving. It was moving when it bled.
Yeah. And you can always see if you have a drop of blood with tiny little bits of splatter in front of it, that's generally the
That's
way.
the direction.
That's the direction it's going.
A pass through with a run, stop, and hunch. The hunch means you are behind the diaphragm.
Yep.
Now, are you liver or are you even further back than that? I don't know, but that generally when they get that hunch, that is behind the diaphragm.
In my experience, that's generally back in the gut region with a liver more often than not, because I think it's probably like the easiest part of the deer to get through. Because you don't really have a lot of rib stuff, guarding like you do forward. So I'll see them, they'll like run 20, 40, 50 yards and stop. And more often than not, they're looking around, wondering what's happening. And then, weirdly enough, you'll see them flicker that tail, and then they just slowly walk off.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, shit.
Yeah.
My first booner did that, and he ran 60 yards, and I'm just like, all right, fall, come on, fall. And then he just walked off, and I didn't know how to react. I was like, oh my God. And we found the dude alive the next day at noon, and I shot him at 7:15 that night. So really important to know all this stuff, and having a buddy, watching hunting videos helps. Pay attention on all these hunting videos, and don't get caught up in just one way. Study them all, like you just said. There's plenty of ways to skin a cat. You just got to figure out what goes along with your style, what you prefer, and everything. But dude, it's been a damn good convo, man.
Absolutely.
I always enjoy these. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to the Mobile Hunter Podcast. And we hope you enjoyed this one. Take it easy, guys.
Have a good one.